Hillary, thank you so much for helping us teach people how to get a grant. What I thought we'd do first is reflect on some of the key decision points that people need to make. Let me start that again. I thought we'd start by reflecting on some key decisions that grant writers need to make as they're going from an area of great interest to them down to something that can even possibly be included in a grant proposal. So can you reflect on, we've mentored many early career researchers or novice researchers just getting started. How do you take a big idea and get it to grant size ideas?
It's definitely a challenge and a process that I encourage people to try some different strategies that can work for them. So certainly important to get words and ideas on paper and then bring them to your mentor, multiple mentors, or team of people. Finding a local works in progress group to get feedback is really important. I think that the value of other people being able to see what your research question is and ask you, really, what is the gap, and then what is the piece that you hope the funder will be interested in funding for that space, that process is very important in refining to get to what actually can be right-sized for a grant.
And how long do you think it takes for people to move through this space of the great idea in their head, the great passion that they have, drafting it down, getting feedback, aligning to a funder? Does not sound fast.
If you really want me to be honest,
I do.
That I think really is a 2 or 3 year process. It is not something that can truly happen over 3 months. I think that grants can be written in 3 months, and that actually is because the early career scientist has been really thoughtful over the past 2 years of having conversations with mentors, reading other grants, getting to know the different funders and funding opportunities, and then perhaps the grant writing for a small first grant could be in 3 months. And then still, it's not going to be accepted the first time, so there's the resubmission process that will happen after that, and that should just be expected.
Right. Okay, I'm glad you said that. I want you to be honest, because often people we have mentored together in our 2-year program take about the first year to figure out exactly what it is they're doing and who would be candidate mentors for that plan. Even though they applied to us and said, oh yeah, I know exactly what I want to do and this is going to be what I do. And of course we get in there because it might have been one of the first times they've really written down their ideas and shared it with somebody who's not them. And of course we get a hold of it and say, what about this? What about this? What about this? So it really does take a significant amount of time, 6 to 12 months, to really sort of break everything down and then build it back up again to a real thing. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that an intensive 2-year cohort for early career scholars is perhaps the ideal to really refine a large early career grant. I think that there are also other opportunities. I think about applications for various short courses or intensives or even year-long cohorts that might be discipline-specific. So in aging, I'm aware of national cohorts that are really focused on helping a early career scientist work on a grant proposal. And so to even, as you mentioned, apply for that, you have to already have been thinking a little bit about your idea and honing it so that you can apply to that development program and then spend the year, as you're saying, doing the iterative process of grant writing. So that's where I do think it ends up being a 2-year plus process. And I think it's also important to remember that multiple ideas are forming and being refined, even as you're perhaps working on one grant. In making decisions about what you're not including in the one grant you're working on, there's the opportunity to keep track of the other ideas, which likely are grants in themselves to a different funder or a different mechanism.
That's a great point. There are some scholars who are so generative, right? And they just have idea machine. They're never short of ideas. And one of the challenges for them is that's a great idea. It's a legitimately great idea. It might even be a fundable idea, but not in this grant. So, have a special idea book or have a special, online document or something where they can feel good about taking that idea and writing it down. It won't be lost. It might be well developed at some point, and set it aside at this time while they plow forward on their one idea. The other thing you said that I think is a really great idea, especially for novice or early career researchers who are in small institutions where there's not a huge clinical enterprise, lots of graduate programs, just people around, you can apply to these wonderful boot camp type programs that they're often called young investigator or early career programs, and they'll meet with you maybe at a conference and then regularly over time remotely, and they will help you write a grant. And one of the major milestones of that program is a grant that could be submitted. And even if that isn't the exact one you submit, it really gives you a great temporary mentorship team to specifically help you move through that. So anybody at even small institutions can try for those.
I think it's also important to engage who you have, either as a colleague who could become a mentor at your local institution, or perhaps using the application process to one of those national programs to even be an opportunity to start a mentorship relationship. I think especially for postdoctoral fellows or individuals in their early years of being on faculty, maybe feeling isolated, being really aware of what programs could I apply to nationally, and using that as an opportunity to reach out to someone at your institution or someone else's and say, I'm interested in applying for this program for development and how to write this grant. Can you give me some feedback on my idea? Because even that is a honing process of what ultimately can be the right-sized grant project.
Yes, I think that is an excellent description. I think we could share a couple of things that could strengthen an application to a program like that, right? One is, despite being early in their training, there's always an interest in seeing a long-standing interest and commitment to some topical area or to research in general. So sometimes people will have come through undergrad and they worked in a lab and they have a paper or 2 or 10, but it's not really their research interest now. So, okay, they had some exposure to research, but it doesn't take a lot of resources to just write a paper and get it submitted to the peer review process. So a published manuscript in the area you're interested in, even if it's just a case report or an opinion piece, would be a strengthening approach. And then I think having done some research on the funding agency you're targeting, so you really understand who are their priority populations, what words do they use to talk about a specific concept. So you do geriatric research. Is it elders? Is it older adults? Is it what? I don't know. There's probably 10 different words that people could use to describe a person of a certain age. You want to speak in the language that they use. Are there any other things you can come up with that would help people?
Taking it one step farther, trying to find individuals who have been funded by that mechanism is important, because for individuals finishing their PhD, they are the expert in what they did their dissertation in.
That's narrow as though it may be.
It's very narrow, which then means from a grant writing perspective, the audience that they're writing to is unlikely to be the expert that they are in their PhD field. So it's important to find others that have been funded by that agency to get that sense, not just of what the right words are to use, but also what type of science are they interested in, and then how can you communicate your science to that particular audience, which for especially individuals who have been really steeped in certain conceptual frameworks, or on the other side, have never done something with a conceptual framework, and the funder has their own particular conceptual frameworks. Those are all important things to figure out as you're starting to decide what mechanism makes sense, for which funder.
Okay, this is brilliant advice. Now let's go even further. Can you ask people for their grants? Yeah. How do you do that? Tell me, how would we advise people to go about this and get yes?
It's very common to ask and receive a grant among a supportive community. So I think that you want to be really thoughtful about how you approach someone. It should be based on some amount of relationship. If you personally don't have that relationship, identifying someone in your network, a mentor who can make the email connection to ask for the grant to be shared. And then, of course, being very upfront about the privacy and confidentiality, that you will keep their grant only for you. You don't share it with anyone else. Those aspects is, I think, a second point. Third, sometimes you can be very specific. If you think someone may not be likely to share something, you could ask, I saw on NIH Reporter, or I saw on the Foundation's website some description, the abstract. Would you be willing to share a small part, because this particular aspect is of interest to me? So I think there are a couple different examples of ways to ask. In the context of relationship, I've found people to be very generous.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea. And to your first point, you and I have done this many times. We have a mentee, we say, there was a mentee, fill in the blank. She did a study that involved this method. I bet she would be happy to share her proposal with you. And then we write the email connecting the person, and either they end up with the whole grant, often they do get the whole grant, or they get the section that describes that. And as you say, you just want to be very professional about it, and you're not going to post it on Twitter or X or share it with anyone without permission. It's for your own betterment. Yeah, that's great. Can we talk a little bit about identifying mentors? Because so often, early career researchers or novice researchers are actually required to have a mentor apply with them. And so some programs you're assigned a mentor, okay. But what if you're not? What if you're an assistant professor and you're the big winner, you got the job, and they say, what grant are you going to write? How do you start identifying mentors in your new institution?
Yeah, I think that even starting with the person who hired you, or the person who you can tell is really knowledgeable in your division or department, is important to ask the question of, what is mentorship like here? And that is a way that can open up that conversation. So if you truly know nothing about mentorship where you now are, having that conversation with knowledgeable people in a open-handed way is important, where you're not yet asking that particular person to be your mentor, but instead trying to get a sense of the opportunities and strengths of mentorship in your current environment is important. And then often out of that conversation, if you're having it with the right initial person, they will send you to talk with 2, 3, 4 people, and it's important to follow up and talk with each of those people. And again, that's where the email invitations and introductions can happen. I think then, as you're building your network, learning more about people, that's actually a process also of honing your grant ideas, because each time you're having a conversation, they want to know what you're interested in, and you're becoming hopefully more refined in what you are sharing about. So keep track of that process. I would advise people, be taking notes, see what's working, what type of positive or negative feedback you're getting from people that you trust or who have a specific area of expertise that overlaps with your interests. And then in terms of actually establishing mentorship relationships, that's a big conversation. And I think I, mentored by you, have really appreciated the importance of team mentorship, that we want to have people know a lot of different people who are mentors in different ways. Certainly can be a content mentor, a senior career mentor. Depending on the complexity of one's career, that actually may be a couple different people. An academic mentor may not be the same as the research mentor, just depending on the complexities. And then also, I think a challenge can be the methodological mentors. And perhaps others would have great insights of like, how do you find a statistics mentor or a qualitative mentor or implementation science mentor? I think the first is to know that that's an important perspective and to even be looking for it, because it may not be a sort of a mentorship space that perhaps a primary content mentor has. You know, in terms of area of overlap of aging, that person may not then also have the statistical mentorship.
Right. And in the same way, one mentor can't be all things to all people, right? You need many mentors. You know, you as the investigator can't be all things either. So, you know, I do think many clinicians coming out of training are like, well, I know a little bit of, you know, programming. I'm going to do my own statistics. I'm going to go do all my own consenting. I'm going to go, and you say, wait a minute. You know, that is not possible in the model of this team science world. Really, no, I don't think any agency wants to see a highly trained physician be turned into something else. They want you to be what you are and be a competent partner and consumer of some other kind of science. So as you say, it's often methods for that. For PhDs who are more methods oriented, it's finding the clinical collaborators who care about your questions and know something about the real implementation. So I think there's a real desire to match make all the time. And so just making it part of your professional life to connect with people, to get to know them while you're sharing your ideas is just like good to build the bench anyway. Because you never know when you're going to need somebody.
Yes, definitely.
But I love your idea. I hadn't thought about this, but you are so correct that each time we send people to meet a new person, they're re-pitching who they are and what they care about, and they're probably refining it more and more, because sometimes what you say triggers some totally different train of thought in somebody, and you say, how did we end up talking about that? I was trying to tell them about this. Well, it was the way you explained it. You got them going. And so each time they can refine it, and then we say everybody's talking about the same thing, that's a beautiful thing.
That's the ideal. Where I've seen it not work as well, and it's important for the early career scientists to just be aware if this is happening, is if every time you meet with someone new, you become a chameleon to that idea. And so then instead of refining, it feels like the idea is wandering and has this path. And some amount of that at the very beginning is important, to be broad. And I would just encourage people to take very good notes and to think, to try it on for size, to use another metaphor, you know, to write it down, write the additional, the research question, do a little bit of lit search. Is there really a research gap here? What would then the specific aims look like if I were to work with this person? And then if it turns out that the next person that someone talks with, the idea changes a different way, that's okay for a time. But also important to reflect on the other aspects of mentorship, which is how is communication going? How is the work style going? Does the mentor have current time capacity to support the early career scientist with the amount of time that you need? so that you could potentially start to return back to that person and say, I talked with these 3 people that you asked me to. Here's what I'm reporting back, and here's actually what my current thoughts are about the idea.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. Much of that can go into your idea book, right? And that's highly desirable for your future, right? Because you would like this kernel of goodness to turn into many different offshoots, maybe that suggest other extensions, other funders, just completely different areas. That's wonderful. But yet, you can't do it all at the same time. But I love actually spinning out how would this mesh in with my study if it was. I mean, maybe they're not offering that. But it's a great opportunity to engage and think it through for a time and set it aside and get out of the room without saying yes to something. Do not commit to something, right? It is, especially when you meet with somebody who is very engaging. They see lots of potential. If you just do your thing this way, yay, but don't say yes to anything. Thank them. Write it down, reflect, and come back in the context of other things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is where it is also good to be quite organized about, a primary goal of an independent research project, whatever type and size that is, and then how these mentorship conversations can be seeds or next steps for collaborative projects. And just being clear that a collaborative project is terrific. Let's make sure that this doesn't upset my goal of writing this grant. But if I have time and space, let's do both right now. Because that mentor may be someone who's part of your mentorship team, and you don't want to walk away from collaborations if they ultimately are going to be part of what you do. So,
right. And it's a high level. It's a higher level skill than one would imagine. The one thing I'll reflect on before we move on from this topic is it's so helpful to have some kind of mentor or trusted other to help you debrief these opportunities as you come. So almost to be an outside arbiter, not your senior content mentor, not somebody who has a stake in the thing necessarily, but somebody who really has your best interest at heart and can take a big picture view. So not just one study, one grant, one paper, but rather your research career, your academic career, your mission-driven orientation, who could take the big view with you so you have some anchor to talk to.
I'm really excited that you named it that. We should write a paper about this if we haven't already. The best interest mentor, because I think that early career scientists maybe are in one of 2 camps. One, they already have a mentor that they moved across the country to work with, and that's then the senior career mentor. And in many ways, that early career scientist has lots of opportunity because they have a senior mentor who really understands their content area. I think others who are in smaller or different environments where they don't have someone that they can identify as, this is the senior mentor who I exactly want to be like, it can feel very isolating. And I actually think that that's probably the majority of our context when we start out, because actually we're very excited about something that has not been done yet.
Right.
So sort of by definition.
And how many times have we seen this young person, inexperienced person hired as the research growth person? Like, we don't have any of this kind of research. You will be this person, and it's you and you. There are no natural collaborators.
And so then if you do have the fortune to establish a best interest mentor, that is excellent, and it's certainly good enough. So I would encourage that as individuals can find that mentor that has your best interests to help you process the different conversations you're having with different scientists while actually helping the early career scientists develop themselves as the pioneer.
Indeed. Hillary, you are a prolific writer, grant writer, and peer review publication writer. Everybody wants to do it like that. could we talk about your writing process? What worked for you when you were just getting started, and how have you evolved? What's working for you now, because it is working?
I love to write. So I think that that's important. And so figuring out how to find the zone where I can protect that time to write is important. And then I also really need feedback frequently. So my process is to get words on a page, move things forward, have a small team of collaborators that I'm sharing drafts back and forth with really clear, agreed upon timelines so that we all have a successful process in it, has been a key. And to then incorporate trainees at different places also, I think, is a way that as a mid-career scientist, that's the opportunity to continue to write even as my writing time is less, is to mentor in writing. I think that some people have had my experience where their PhD or some of their formative early research, whether in residency or a different type of training, was in a field that they are not in right now. And I really have maximized what I learned from that time, which was how to read and write. Reading other people's studies and focusing on actually making progress and getting words onto a page.
Okay, there's a couple things you mentioned that I want to follow up on. One is reading other people's stuff and giving feedback. Often, early career novice researchers think, I don't have time to be part of that writing group. I don't have time to give feedback to other people. I need all my time to be on my own writing. And yet, don't we learn so much, certainly as a grant writer? That's one of the main reasons you review, partly for the good of the field and partly because it's so educational. You get to see grants and you get to hear them be critiqued, and it's hugely formative. And I think we've seen people who help review other people's writing do indeed become better scientific writers.
Yes, and I think just acknowledging, controlling one's emotions. Like, it's possible to see someone's beautiful writing and to have emotions of, I will never be able to write like this, or how do we get where I'm at to that, and just push through. Just take the wonderful example that it is, learn from it, give feedback. Everyone's writing can be better and clearer, because when you actually read it, you're like, I don't totally understand that.
That's good. Okay, another question. You said you set aside time to write. You are an extremely busy, successful investigator, clinician, human in the world. What's your strategy for making time and sticking to it?
I've thought a lot about my personality, and I match my writing to my personality, which is to say I don't use one thing for a long, long time. And I'm also an extrovert, and I like doing things with people. So finding accountability in writing is also really important. So I have enjoyed being part of writing challenges with other people in a collaborative space. I also, at different times, have blocked my calendar and just found the best time in my week to write and block that, so then I know I don't have appointments in that time. I also really like seeing that I'm making progress, so I currently am using a writing tracker so I can keep track of where each manuscript is, and that just keeps me accountable of, has it been a long time since I've opened something up? I'll also admit that I'm the bottleneck for a lot of the projects I'm part of, so that's motivating too.
A little guilt never hurt anybody, right? Just a little. I think you're doing great, Hillary. Thank you so much.
I also, just as a practical tip, I remember a really good colleague just commit to, from being a mentor, but I think this is also true from being a mentee, that if you're requested to give feedback on something, if you're writing, to turn it back around in 7 days. If you don't have time to do it in the next 7 days, it may not be a priority, so that's a different conversation. And you can generate momentum if you're passing things back and forth with a mentor and a mentee or a collaborative team, if everyone agrees to make progress relatively quickly.
Yeah, I think building an accountability, whether it's you in your tracker or a timer or a colleague or a calendar invite, is always the way to go. Thank you so much.